Welcome back to my channel, Watering Can. My name is Candace. I am your host, and today I want to talk a little bit about how to water your plants. It's a common misconception that plants should be on some type of a watering schedule. You think when you go to the nursery, you're going to bring this plant home and you're going to have, maybe once a week you'll water this plant. But a lot of the times what happens is you start doing that and your plant just yellows out and just starts immediately dying. The number one way to kill your plants is by overwatering. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you overwater your plants are going to sit in the water, they're going to have wet feet, and what's going to happen is root rot will start. Your plant will usually start displaying symptoms like yellow leaves, but you might not know why if you haven't killed a lot of houseplants before. So if you've just gotten a plant from a nursery and you don't know what to do with it, but you look up how often you should be watering it, and it tells you every 3 days, every 4 days, once a week, it's a common misconception that you should be following those kinds of rules. What you should really be doing is listening to your plant and watering it when it needs to be watered instead of when it's convenient for you to water it. How do you know that a plant needs to be watered? Sometimes it will display symptoms. For example, this particular plant, it's getting a little bit of curling on the leaves because it's a little bit thirsty. I just repotted this and I haven't watered it yet, but I will show you. Some plants are very dramatic and they will faint or droop when they're thirsty. Some plants will get crispy around the tips of the leaves. There are a few easy ways to tell whether your plant needs to be watered or not. The first way is by probing the soil with your finger. If you stick your finger into the soil and soil is stuck on your finger, it's a good way of telling that the soil is still too moist to be watered. Some people swear by the first couple of inches being dry, but I would recommend sticking your finger as far into the soil as possible, because when you try and determine whether it's dry only on the top part, it could still have very moist soil at the bottom part. So you want to get as deep in there as possible. The second way that you could tell is by sticking a chopstick or a bamboo skewer into the soil. Same kind of method. It's like when you bake brownies in the kitchen, you want to stick a toothpick in and make sure that no brownie sticks to it. Same thing. If you stick a bamboo skewer or a chopstick into the soil, as long as there are no big chunks on the outside, it's pretty dry. You want to make sure you aren't watering when the soil is already moist. The third way of telling, and this is my most recent favorite, is by using a moisture meter. It's not the cure-all, but it does help you if you're unsure. So what you would do is stick this right into the soil, and if it reads dry, it looks like there's a 1 to 10 meter on here. So depending on the plant, you don't want to let your plants dry out too much, but if it's at like a 2, then you might want to consider watering it. Moving on, there are 2 major ways that you can water your plant. You can either top water or bottom water. The first method is top watering. What you're going to do is you are going to water the plant thoroughly enough that about 10% of the water leaks out of the drainage holes on the pot. That's another thing I haven't yet mentioned, drainage holes. The reason why nursery pots have a ton of drainage holes is because you'd want to make sure that plants aren't sitting in their own water. If they sit in the water, they will eventually get root rot if they don't get the opportunity to dry out in between watering. So drainage holes are excellent to have. One thing that I frequently do, especially making sure when I top water, is I either use a tray or plate underneath my pots, or I use something called a cachet pot, and I just leave the nursery pots inside the cachet pot so that they can catch all of the excess water that drains out. I will show you guys how I top water. First thing I do is I just wet the soil a tiny bit, especially when the soil is super dry. Sometimes what can happen is that soil compaction will happen and the water will just run off the sides and it won't actually get into the soil and the roots of your plant. So by kind of priming it with just a little bit of water, it makes way for the rest of the water to come through. So I let that soak in for a couple of seconds, and then I continue to top water. Like I said, I wait until about 10% of the water starts coming out of the bottom of the pot. I'll wait a few minutes for this to drain, and then once I am satisfied that it isn't going to continuously drip anymore, then I will empty out the cachet pot so that it isn't sitting in water. The second method is bottom watering. So in order to bottom water, same idea with the cachet pot anyway. You fill water in the cachet pot, and then you can use a nursery pot or any other pot with a lot of drainage. leaking dirt all over the place, but just make sure that it has drainage holes. The idea behind bottom watering is that the roots are going to use capillary action to actually pull water out of the bottom of the pot, as opposed to top watering, which just uses gravity to get to every bit of the soil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up a little bit of water in here. Just make sure that there's a little bit more than reaching the drainage holes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just let this pot sit in here. And you know you're done bottom watering when you can touch the top of the soil and it's starting to get moist. After the top is a bit moist, then you're just going to discard the rest of the water that's in the cachet pot. And you can do this also with a tray or a bowl or whatever else. It doesn't have to be a cachet pot, but that's the reason I like these pots. So there are a few things that will affect how often you will need to water. One of them is the type of plant that we're talking about. People neglect the fact that plants come from nature and we forget all about their environments, or their natural environments, I should say. If you have a cacti, for example, they thrive in desert conditions. They're in super dry conditions, and then all of a sudden it pours. Then they take up all of the water they can possibly take up, and then they just hold onto it. So if you bring a cactus into your house and you're trying to water it on a weekly schedule, you're going to kill it really fast. Then we're talking about maybe tropical houseplants. It's quite a bit more humid and also rains a lot more in the tropics. So what you want to do with your houseplants is kind of mimic its natural environment, and that's when you're going to have a bit more success. In general, things with thicker leaves or succulents are probably going to hold more water and need to be watered less often than things with thinner leaves. The second thing that's going to affect how often you need to water is your soil. Depending on what kind of soil you use, it might hold more water or it might drain faster, depending on the ingredients of the soil. For example, perlite and orchid bark will create a better draining mixture, and your plants won't sit in wet soil for too long. So those are good amendments to add yourself, or good things to look for when you're looking in a pre-mixed bag of soil. The last factor is the amount of light that the plant is getting. If the plant is up close to a southern facing window, it is likely getting very strong light all day long, and that plant is going to use more water and probably also grow more quickly because of it. If a plant is very far away from a window, chances are you're not going to have to water that almost at all. You're probably going to have to water those plants, every few weeks or every few months, depending on what kind of a plant it is. So the amount of light plays a huge factor. So again, just a reminder, wait until your plants want to be watered. Don't water them on your own schedule. Wait until they are dried out. That way, their roots have the best chance of having good health, because they can reach and grow to reach all of the moist parts in the soil instead of getting root rot or just having shallow roots because of it. And have fun. So 2 other small notes that I just thought of and I wanted to add. One is the temperature of the water that you should be using while watering your plants. You do not want to shock the roots, so don't give your plants super cold water or super hot water. You want to use room temperature or slightly lukewarm water when you're watering your plants. Second thing, if you're watering your plants with tap water has a lot of chemicals and minerals in it. If you would like to use tap water, let it sit overnight if you can. This way, any of the chlorine, which is probably one of the most damaging things to your plants, the chlorine dissipates overnight. So if you can, let your tap water sit out overnight. I water my plants with tap water a lot. The only negative effects that you might see really are some browning on the tips of the leaves of the plant, but if it doesn't bother you, it's fine. That was my episode on watering. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.